The lake died on a Tuesday, and nobody heard it scream but me. At sunrise, the waterline was gone, replaced by a ring of cracked mud and a smell like metal and rot. My dog froze at the edge, hackles sharp, staring at a jagged pipe jutting from the bank like a buried blade. Fresh tire tracks cut through the shore, still wet, heading toward the HOA's restricted service trail. By the time the board sent out an email blaming seasonal changes, I'd already taken photos, water samples, and realized someone expected me to stay quiet about what I'd found. I followed the tire tracks while the morning fog still clung to the trees. They stopped at a patch of freshly disturbed soil, the kind you only see when someone buries something fast and doesn't expect to be caught. Scout paced in circles, nose low, whining a sound he only made during storms or when something was terribly wrong. That's when I saw them. 3 HOA board members, standing on the trail like they'd been waiting. Clipboards, neon vests, and expressions too calm for people who supposedly had no idea what was happening to the lake. One of them, Kendra Lowe, head of the so-called environmental committee, pretended not to see me as she took photos of the dry shoreline. Another whispered into a walkie-talkie. None of them approached. None of them asked why I was there. They just watched, like I was the problem, not the disappearing water. When I stepped closer, Kendra finally smiled tight, rehearsed. "Please stay off active maintenance areas, Mr. Carter. HOA liability rules." Maintenance, that was their word for this. For the first time, I felt it not paranoia, not suspicion, just certainty. Something bigger was happening behind closed doors, and this was only the beginning. Most people move to Willow Creek Estates for the glossy things, community pools, manicured trails, shiny welcome packets with smiling families on the cover. I moved here for silence. After 23 years as a hydrologist with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, silence wasn't just a luxury. It was the closest thing I had to medicine. Out there, Kandahar, Mosul, the border dams in Jordan, my days were measured in cubic feet per second, and the weight of decisions that decided whether villages flooded or stayed standing. Back home, all I wanted was a place where water spoke first. The house I bought wasn't impressive. A 1,970 ranch with sun-faded siding, a crooked mailbox, and a view of the lake that my late wife, Anna, used to call God's Pulse. She died before we could move an ovarian cancer, quiet and cruel, so the lake became the only place I still felt her. Even Scout, who had once been her dog, still pricked his ears when the wind rolled across the water like he expected her voice to return with it. For 10 years, that lake never changed. Morning mist, summer canoe ripples, kids dangling fishing lines off the community dock. A kind of predictable peace that wrapped itself around the neighborhood like a soft quilt. Even the HOA back then was nothing more than a group of retirees who cared more about potlucks than power. Then everything shifted last year when a new board was elected. Bryce Tallman, the new HOA president, was the kind of man who talked like every sentence was a pitch deck. Clean haircut, hyper-confident grin, a smartwatch that blinked every 10 seconds. He'd moved from Austin after selling a tech startup, and he brought that same startup energy to the neighborhood. Efficiency, modernization, and an obsession with brand identity. He once said during a meeting, "This community could be a premier lakeside destination if we optimize our natural amenities." Nobody asked what optimize meant. Beside him was Kendra Lowe, head of the environmental committee, though she had no background in ecology. She was a former marketing strategist who believed anything could be improved, with nicer signage and a few trending buzzwords. When she talked about nature, it sounded like she was describing a spa menu. It didn't take long for their changes to start creeping in. New surveillance cameras, weekly drone flyovers to check for violations, and a sudden spike in fines for things like decorative clutter or non-harmonized holiday decor. People complained quietly, but the board dismissed them with polite emails full of corporate sincerity. I tried to stay out of it, truly. I'd dealt with enough bureaucracies in my life to know most battles aren't worth fighting. But then construction trucks started appearing near the lake trail unannounced, unlogged. And neighbors reported hearing digging late at night. And someone spotted surveyor flags marking the south bank. When I asked Bryce about it during a community barbecue, he brushed it off. Routine upgrades, Mason. You know how it is. Infrastructure maintenance. Except I did know how it was. And nothing about it looked routine. The day Scout growled at the lowered shoreline, I felt something tighten in my chest, something old, something instinctual. Water doesn't disappear by accident. Not like that, not that fast. What I didn't know yet was that the lake wasn't the only thing slowly draining. The community was too trust, transparency, all slipping away under the polished charm of people who believed rules were just obstacles for those without creativity. And as I stood on my porch that night, paperwork from my old core days spread across the table, and the lake dark and silent beyond the trees, I realized something I wished I hadn't. Whatever the HOA was doing, they weren't doing it for us. In the weeks after the water line dropped, the lake stopped feeling like a lake and started feeling like a crime scene. Every morning, Scout pulled me toward the south bank before I'd even finished my coffee. And every morning, something new was wrong. The first escalation came quietly, too quietly. At 6:12 a.m., a landscaping crew I'd never seen before rolled up in unmarked pickup trucks. No HOA logos, no contractor plates, just matte gray trucks with tinted windows. They unloaded tools and equipment with the speed of men who didn't want witnesses. I walked down with my phone out. "Morning," I said. No one answered. One of them lifted a shovel like he was ready to swing if I stepped closer. Then I saw it. A second drainage pipe, half buried, angled toward a wooded easement that didn't belong to the HOA at all county land. Installing infrastructure across property lines without county approval wasn't just a violation. It was a legal fuse waiting for a spark. I took photos. A man in a hard hat walked over, face blank. "You can't be here," he said. "This is public easement," I replied. He hesitated a sign he hadn't expected me to know the term. By noon, the pipe was installed. The next day, an email from the HOA appeared in my inbox. Violation notice HOA Standard 12. PEDWAR. Unauthorized shoreline surveillance. Surveillance. For taking photos of my own lake, the fine. $200, due in 10 days. The email ended with, "Further monitoring activity may be reported to county authorities for safety concerns." Safety concerns. They were painting me as unstable. I sent a short reply. Under Florida Open Lake Statute 370-2.001, the shoreline is not restricted property. Documentation is lawful. 10 minutes later, the email thread was locked. I could no longer reply. I drove to the county clerk's office, a beige building with flickering lights and a front desk decorated with plastic pumpkins. A clerk named Miss Harris pulled up the permit database. I watched her frown deepen. "Nothing filed for Willow Creek," she said. "No drainage permits, no excavation notices, no inter-easement use approvals." I leaned in. Could they have filed under a different project name? Not for waterway modification. Those must be under the subdivision name by law. Then she lowered her voice. "You're the third person this month asking about them." "The third? Who were the other two?" That night, an envelope appeared on my porch. No name, no stamp, just a manila folder with a single paper clip. Inside were 6 photographs. One of Kendra talking to the unmarked contractors, 2 of the pipe installation from a higher angle likely taken from a drone, 1 photo of Bryce pointing at a map with red marker circles around the lake, and the last 2, they showed stacks of boxes labeled Phase 2, Shoreline Redesign Materials. I didn't have a drone. I didn't take those photos. Someone on the inside was helping me. But why stay anonymous? The next morning, as I was loading tools into my truck, Bryce himself walked down my driveway with 2 board members flanking him like bodyguards. "Mason," he said with a politician's fake warmth, "we've had some concerns." "About the lake?" I asked. He smiled thinly. "About your behavior." Kendra stepped forward. "A few residents reported you photographing their yards at night." "That's a lie," I said, calm. Bryce folded his arms. "We're considering a behavioral injunction under HOA Section 8.5. If approved, it restricts you from speaking at meetings, approaching board members, or observing maintenance activities." "Observing maintenance," I repeated. "You mean exposing illegal construction?" His expression flickered. That was when one of the neighbors, Mrs. Delaney from 2 houses down, walked out holding her morning yogurt cup like a microphone. "Leave him alone," she shouted. Half the street heard it. Bryce's smile broke for the first time. That afternoon, I drafted a Sunshine Records request, the state's version of FOIA, for all HOA communications regarding drainage, contractors, environmental modifications, Phase 2, plans. Under state law, HOAs must turn over non-privileged records if a homeowner formally requests them. I delivered it in person. Linda, the HOA manager, blinked twice when she saw the form. "You're requesting internal emails?" she said. "Yes," I replied. She swallowed. "I'll have to notify the board." "Good," I said. "Do that." The next day, I received a notice claiming my request was overly burdensome and would require a 90-day extension. 90 days. Exactly the amount of time it would take for the lake to die completely. 2 nights later, at 11:47 p.m., Scout woke me with a low growl, the kind that vibrated through the floorboards. I stepped outside. A drone hovered over the lake, lights dimmed, moving slowly along the exposed shoreline. Not a hobby drone commercial grade, long range. It wasn't the HOA's. Theirs made a loud whirring noise and flashed bright green lights. This one was silent. And then it happened. It turned toward my house and held position. Watching, I stepped forward, raising my flashlight. The drone backed up and zipped into the trees. The next morning, a new violation notice was taped to my door. Unapproved nighttime illumination affecting wildlife habitat. Fine. $150. The turning point. They wanted me confused. They wanted me overwhelmed. They wanted me buried under enough violations to stop asking questions. But they'd forgotten something. I'd spent my career documenting water under combat conditions, deserts, war zones, collapsed dams. A hostile HOA wasn't going to break me. Besides, someone out there was feeding me information. Someone who knew more than I did. The lake was shrinking. The lies were growing. And for the first time, I understood. This wasn't mismanagement. This was a cover-up. A big one. And it was about to crack. The hearing was held in a windowless room on the second floor of the Cypress County Administrative Center, a place that smelled like dried paper, burnt coffee, and every argument a homeowner had ever lost. The long fluorescent lights hummed like a warning. Scout wasn't allowed inside, so he stayed with Dana in the hallway, pacing. At the front, a panel of 3 officials sat behind a row of microphones, each with a nameplate: County Water Authority, Environmental Compliance Officer, and Administrative Judge. Beside them, a court reporter typed like her life depended on it. Bryce and Kendra entered late. Bryce wore a navy suit 2 sizes too confident. Kendra held a binder labeled Phase 2, Confidential, as if that made it less incriminating. The judge adjusted his glasses. Let's begin. Willow Creek Estates HOA is under review for unpermitted hydrological alteration, cross-easement encroachment, and potential violation of state conservation statutes. Bryce cleared his throat. Your Honor, we acted in good faith. Sit, the judge said, without looking up. The county officer turned to me. Mr. Carter, you filed the complaint. Please present your findings. I plugged in the USB drive I'd guarded like a loaded weapon. The projector illuminated the wall with images. The exposed shoreline, the second pipe, the drone photos from the anonymous envelope. My voice stayed steady. These aren't fluctuations. These are engineered diversions. Someone lowered the lake intentionally and rerouted water into restricted county land. The installation violated both HOA covenants and State Statute 19.4.7 regarding watershed manipulation. The judge nodded. And your credentials? I handed over my documents. 23 years with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, primary hydrologist on multiple classified watershed stabilization operations. Bryce shifted in his chair. Then the county officer pulled out a file I hadn't seen. Let the record show, she said, that Willow Creek OA submitted 0 permit requests in the last 12 months. Yet invoices from a contractor, Greenspan Site Solutions, show payments totaling $42,800 for shoreline modification and preliminary drainage trenching. Kendra. The judge turned to her. Miss Lowe, as environmental chair, you approve these? She swallowed. I trusted the recommendations from our president. All eyes shifted to Bryce. He raised his hands. We needed to lower the lake to prepare for Phase 2 amenity upgrades. What upgrades? The judge asked. Bryce hesitated. The county officer slammed a document onto the table. Phase 2, Lakeside Recreation Expansion, including boardwalk installation, private rentable pavilions, and a revenue-generating kayak launch, all requiring the lake to be reshaped. Whispers rippled through the room. The judge leaned back. So the purpose wasn't maintenance. It was a commercial redesign. It was going to benefit the community, Bryce snapped. It would have violated 3 state environmental codes, the officer replied. Then she dropped the final blow, and the second drainage pipe crossed into county preservation land. That's a criminal encroachment. Bryce's face fractured into panic. This is a misunderstanding. The officer cut him off. Our investigation also found an internal email from you instructing contractors to proceed without delay. Permits will be handled once Phase 2 gains support. The judge folded his hands. Mr. Tallman, Do you deny authorizing unpermitted excavation? Bryce opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Kendra whispered, Bryce, just tell them. He didn't. He reached for his binder like he might run. The judge tapped the gavel once soft, lethal. Effective immediately, Willow Creek Estates HOA is ordered to cease all activity near the lake. The board is placed under administrative supervision pending further investigation. A restoration plan will be drafted under county oversight. Additionally, he turned to Bryce and Kendra. Criminal referrals will be sent to the State Environmental Protection Bureau. Bryce sank into his chair. Kendra began to cry. The judge turned to me. Mr. Carter, thank you for your diligence. Your testimony was instrumental. I nodded. My hands finally shook, but not from fear. From release. When I stepped outside, Scout pressed against me, tail low, sensing everything. Dana stood too, arms crossed, eyes bright. You did it, she whispered. Not exactly, I thought, because the lake wasn't fixed yet, and something in Bryce's defeated stare told me we hadn't seen the full truth. Not even close. The HOA's collapse didn't happen with fireworks or apologies. It happened in silence, slow, clumsy, like a building buckling inward after years of hidden strain. Within 48 hours of the hearing, 3 board members resigned. The HOA website went offline. The security drone stopped flying. For the first time in months, the neighborhood felt unguarded. And strangely, that's when the work really began. The county placed the subdivision under temporary administrative control. A restoration team arrived, actual hydrologists, geologists, people who wore real boots instead of HOA-branded sneakers. They set up sensors along the shoreline, installed measuring stakes, and mapped every cut, trench, and pipe the HOA had buried. One morning, a state truck stopped in front of my house. Elaine Turner stepped out, clipboard under her arm. Mr. Carter, she said, you were right about the subsurface seepage. The lake's still bleeding. We walked the perimeter together. Scout trotted ahead, nose in the wind. The lake wasn't dead, not anymore, but it wasn't alive either. It was a patient stabilized in the ER, breathing shallow, waiting for real treatment. The soil will take months to rebalance, Elaine said. Maybe a year, but it'll recover. I exhaled. She paused at the south bank, where new crews were dismantling the illegal pipe. You ever think about consulting again? She asked. I laughed, not officially. Well, she said, tapping her pen against the clipboard, unofficially, you already are. The neighborhood shifts. The community reacted in ways I didn't expect. Some avoided me, too embarrassed to admit they believed the HOA instead of the evidence. Others brought casseroles, handshakes, thank yous whispered like confessions. One elderly couple left a note in my mailbox. We didn't stand with you early. We will now. But the biggest shift was the meetings. With the old board gone, the county hosted open assemblies in the clubhouse. No microphones, no posturing, just people talking like neighbors again. A young father asked, how do we prevent another HOA from going rogue? A teenager surprisingly added, why did nobody check what they were doing in the first place? And someone else asked the question nobody wanted to voice. What happens when the county leaves? Won't we fall back into the same mess? Nobody had an answer. The ghost of Bryce Tallman. Rumors about Bryce spread faster than mosquito season. Some said he fled to Texas. Others claimed he was negotiating a plea deal. One neighbor swore they saw him near the lake at 2 a.m., just watching. I didn't believe most of it. But one night, after taking Scout out for his walk, I saw a familiar silhouette standing at the far dock, arms crossed, shoulders slumped. By the time I reached the curve in the trail, he was gone. Whether it was him or just guilt wearing his shape, I don't know. A community rebuilt? When the county scheduled the special election, people lined up outside the clubhouse, like they were casting ballots for president. They weren't voting for power, they were voting for trust. Elijah, the awkward young man who had once knocked on my door clutching a clipboard, won the presidency by a landslide. He ran on 3 promises: transparency, environmental stewardship, an HOA that serves, not controls. At the first meeting under his leadership, he handed me something unexpected, a laminated volunteer badge. Community Hydrology Advisor, it read. I looked at him. You don't have to give me a title, I said. We don't, he replied, but we want you to have a voice, a real one. For the first time in months, I felt something unclench inside me. The lake began healing in increments. Patches of green returned along the bank. Dragonflies hovered again. Even the air smelled cleaner, less like rot and more like the memory of summers long gone. But healing has a sound, a rhythm. And one night in late July, the rhythm changed. It was close to midnight. Scout lifted his head first. Not a growl this time, just confusion. I stepped onto the porch. Moonlight touched the water, gentle and silver. Then I heard it. A low mechanical rumble. Slow, consistent, coming from beyond the tree line on the far side of the lakeland that didn't belong to the HOA or the county, but to a private development company that had purchased several parcels months earlier. I saw floodlights flick on between the trees. Engine as revved it. Metal clanked. Not the HOA this time. Something new. Something bigger. The lake had survived one war. But as I stood there, Scout leaning against my leg, the sound rolled across the water like a warning. Maybe the real fight hadn't started yet.